Every time a workplace wellness program is devised or strategized, it always assumes that everyone thinks, focuses, and recharges the same way. But this unfortunately leaves out neurodivergent employees. So here we have Samantha Levin on workplace wellness and neurodivergence, covering definitions, accommodations, and how to build programs that are inclusive by design. So let me start with the first question. How would you define neurodivergence and which conditions does it typically cover in a workplace context?
Yeah, so neurodivergency, a term coined by Scientologist Judy Singer, treats differences like autism and ADHD as a natural variation in the brain rather than disorders to fix. And in a workplace context, it usually covers ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dysprasia, sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, and Tourette's. It often overlaps with mental health conditions like anxiety, but neurodivergency is about wiring, while mental health is about state and, really conflating the two leads to the wrong kind of support.
Okay. So what is the connection between neurodivergence and workplace well-being specifically as opposed to general inclusion?
So, inclusion is about representation and access, but well being is about whether someone can actually sustain themselves in the role day to day. And when needs go unmet, you see burnout, masking fatigue, and people quietly leaving. Well being has to be the actual goal, not just a way to frame neurodivergent traits as a productivity hack the company benefits from. So, yes.
One thing I heard you talk about that masking fatigue. So I've heard masking thrown about a lot in the workplace conversations around neurodivergence. So what does it actually mean?
Yeah, so masking means suppressing your natural behaviors. So you read as neurotypical. And while it can feel like a shorter term, survival skill, long term it compounds into chronic fatigue, mental health decline and disengagement. It also hides the needs itself. So since a manager can't accommodate what they don't know is there. So really masking those feelings so managers really can't help what's going on.
Yeah, and when managers cannot, and another point about the managers cannot help when they do not know. Some employees do not disclose at all. So why do they do that, and what is the risk about when that happens?
Yeah, employees mostly stay quiet out of fear of being judged or, having people see a diagnosis instead of their work. And that fear is often, earned because of workplace, haven't proven the disclosure, won't cost credibility. So non-disclosure has a real cost for employees too, since you end up managing the burnout and turnover without ever addressing the cause, and disclosure only becomes safe through consistent behavior over time, not just on that onboarding side.
Okay. So what is the best approach? Is it individual accommodation or universal design?
Yeah, so they're definitely complementary, not competing. Universal design builds the environment to work for more people from the start. So those friendly meetings, while individual accommodation covers something specific, like body doubling support for one person. I lean towards starting with universal design since it reduces how much anyone has to disclose, but it has limits and individual accommodation still has to exist alongside it. Of course, because, an individual, of course, can have specific needs and you want to make sure that you're accommodating those needs to make sure again that individual is comfortable in that work environment and you're not causing them unnecessary stress and causing the burnout and maybe some retention rates. So you want to make sure that you're also accommodating those individuals. So definitely they complement each other.
And about the stressors, so what are the common physical and sensory stressors that affect neurodivergent employees?
Light is one of them, noise, and maybe open plan layouts are really the big three. Also, the constant sensory filling, pulls cognitive energy away from the actual task.
Mhm.
So it's a focus and stress issue, so not just a comfort one. So remote work can fix the sensory overload, but risk removing social connection. So the environment has to be designed with really both in mind there.
Okay. And if you're building neurodivergent support into a wellness program, what are some practical ways that we could start?
Yeah, so not with the product. That's probably a mistake that a lot of companies make. Buying a tool and calling it done. I'd start with auditing where the friction actually is for neurodivergent employees. Evaluating starting there and then fixing the environment and also training managers before, layering resources. So making sure that they're aware, they have the information, they have the tools to help these individuals before just sending out resources and calling that done. So definitely making sure our managers are equipped. Also, just with that onboarding, phase as well. It starts early, right? So you want to start in that early onboarding phase since it's a new environment and it adds its own sensory overload. So making sure that employees are also just comfortable from the start is another big one as well.
Okay. So, what are the markers of good manager training? Because a lot of difference that can be made in this is through managers. So, how do you train them up?
Yeah, so good training is practical and really scenario based. So, walking managers through real situations and practicing what to say and do, while bad training is really just like a checkbox module nobody really thinks about again. So, what matters most is managers' first response, being curious and allowing that curiosity instead of doubt. So, also just like that backed by a fast process and named, point of contact with real authority to approve support. So making sure that the manager is not only equipped with the resources and the training, but allowing them to have those real built-in scenarios with systems built in for support. So that chain of support, those scenarios that they're walked through, in case they encounter specific situations and they're not really sure what to do, they are trained in those scenarios. So I think that's a really big one. And just that overall trust, making sure you're finding a good fit as a manager that can, really understand employees' needs as well.
So, when somebody tries to support a neurodivergent employee, what are the common mistakes that you see happening?
Um, I would say the one that really bothers me the most is treating neurodivergency like a corporate superpower, flattening a huge range of real experience into, just like a hiring pitch. Beyond that, it's like tokenism and, the one size fits all programs that treat everyone with the same diagnosis as needing the same support, usually without ever asking employees what they actually want. I think a lot of people really, miss that and they just treat them, one size fits all, all these employees fit into this box and they're not really evaluating the employee's needs. So that back to that kind of an individual, accommodation piece, and making those individual accommodations, seeing what the employee needs and how you can support them to make sure that they're set up for success in the work environment.
Okay. I just had one last question. So, whose job is it to fix the mismatch between how work is built and how neurodivergent people operate? And is a wellness program even the right tool in this situation?
Responsibility sits within the organization and how work itself is structured. So, not with the individual's, ability to adapt. And the wellness program can support that, but can't carry the whole thing. It can build awareness and train managers, but it can't redesign job, architecture or fix a broken performance review system. And that limit is worth saying, plainly instead of overselling the program. So, yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, Samantha. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you.